Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the Flood Podcast with Michael and Jeremy. As you can see, I'm not in the studio. I'm actually down where some floodwater has receded. And I thought it was kind of ideal that we some time talking about that very conversation tonight. Look at what it looks like when the floodwater is gone. 'Cause there's residue from what was left behind after the water has pulled away. So Michael, what are you feeling like this week? It's been a crazy week for me.
been it's been a absolutely crazy week. It would have been very easy to say, "Hey, we'll catch you next week." That's not what we're shooting for. We're shooting for real. We're shooting for raw in the moment, and I think that we not only owe it to ourselves to take this opportunity to still commit to meeting up today and having a conversation, but we owe it to those that have already started giving us viewership and also feedback. It's good moment to be together here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And a lot of people are saying that they are realizing that there's more to the conversation, there's more to when issues come and how to handle those tough situations. And I had one person reach out about, why the flood? God said he'd never flood the world again. He did, but that doesn't mean that your life won't feel like it's overwhelming and feel like you're just caught in those moments of, I feel like I'm drowning, I don't know if I'll make it out of this situation. And we know that's not always true, but sometimes convincing yourself of those moments is really tough.
And Jeremy, when Noah started building the ark, was there any thought that there would be a flood?
No, I think it was just obedience. God told
Sure,
him to build
obedience
it,
and
so he built it.
share obedience, faith. And I know that in my life, I strive for the kind of faith demonstrated by building a boat on dry land. And I know you do too, Jeremy. So the title has many reasons. I think that you and I both have established that for the reasons that you already stated, but also the faith that it takes to overcome that flood.
I think depending on where you're at, sometimes you pray for the flood to come, and other times you pray for the flood to recede. I think it's depending on the perspective you're in, because not all floods are bad. And it could be how you interpret it. I heard a story not too long ago where this guy went to a country and everybody was just praying for rain. And he's like, here I am praying for the rain to stop, because in America, whether it's church attendance or businesses, sometimes when the rain is heavy, we don't rejoice. We complain, we stay inside, we change our plans, and we don't do what we're supposed to do. And then other people, they sit there and they rejoice because the rain is there. They get out, they experience the rain for what it brings. So I had some starters here, Michael, and I figured I'd just throw it out there. But I think some of this is going to be very applicable. I think it's going to be life changing. And whatever position you are in life, I think these things can be applied not just in nature, but in your life. You know, Once the destructive part of a flood is over, one of the first things is nutrient rich soil. So in these flood plains or rice paddy fields in over in Asia, they can't wait for the floods, because that's how the rice is grown. The rice doesn't even start until the floodwaters come. I was thinking that how do you feel in your life that when the hard parts are gone, are we looking for that deposit? Are we looking for what did we get out of that situation?
I think it's very hard in the moment, isn't it? And sometimes we
Mhm.
actually have to start reaping the benefits of it for us to start looking back saying, okay, there was a silver lining here. There was something for me to learn in this flood. It's very hard to give praise in the moment, but that's what we're instructed to do. We're instructed to praise through the storm. I think that's very important in especially in the situations that we've already talked about, but some that we'll talk about in the future and things that some of our listeners might be encountering. Praise through the storm, because you're right, those waters are going to recede. And what's going to be left behind can be a blessing if we allow it to be a blessing.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking with people of where things feel problematic and, "Oh, we'll never make it." And I said, "No, you just gotta look at it as a new opportunity. What just happened wasn't good, we accept that, but what are we doing to move forward in that moment? Like, how can we look at this moment as an opportunity versus just sitting there complaining?" I had said something about, the storm, sometimes you make you feel like a victim, where you can look at the whole picture and say, I'm not going to be fall to what the situation brought. And listen, some storms are really bad, and you spent a lot of the episode last week talking about what a bad storm looks like. But there's going to be a lot of good things. I mean, part of our story now is because of what you went through, and knowing that you get to share that nutrient rich experience with somebody else. If we can help somebody else get through it, that is the key thing.
I also want to stress that, it's not easy to praise through the storm, and it's not easy to focus on the nutrient rich soil that will be there when the waters recede. And it's often okay to feel the feelings, to feel the emotions when you're going through it. It's okay to feel like we're flesh. So it's okay to feel like in that moment I might not make it. But that needs to be a fleeting moment, right?
Yes.
Because of all the promises that we have that we can rely upon. We know that as that moment passes, as we feel every emotion, because we're human and that's what we do, get through it, feel those emotions and get past it. And that really leads to what you were saying by being a victim or being a survivor. It's
Yeah.
so important, because as you go through these difficult floods and you come out a survivor, it's not just you that your story is going to impact. It's going to impact anyone you share it with.
Yep. And I remember when I found out that I had full blown diabetes, I thought the world was over for about 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden I felt I felt that, like, that inner voice that wasn't audible, but I'm like, I already told you I got a plan for you. So if he's got a plan for me, then I got to trust that this is only temporary. And that's the approach I took. But I had 5 minutes of being a victim, Michael. I really thought
Yeah.
I thought the world was over. And then it was maybe 15 minutes. But clearly was like, no, I'm gonna change my life, fight this fight, and really I let it beat me for about, like I said, 5 to 15 minutes, but then I was like, "No more. Time to move on."
Mhm.
Because I know, like David, he went after Goliath, and with that confidence, that boldness, like all that training that he had as a shepherd. So when he fought Goliath, it was nothing more than a big animal. But David also knew that he had just been anointed, and he knew that if God anointed him to be the next leader of the country, to be the king, like, I bet you that gave him some confidence. He probably walked in that, like, "I know that this ain't gonna take me out." Like,
Mhm.
there's a calling, and I think
Yeah.
we have to be confident that these storms are temporary. These storms are important parts of development, because you have to watch for what you're experiencing, and you got to look for that nutrient rich soil afterwards. Like, ecosystems is another one of the big features. Floods can create temporary wetlands, refill ponds, provide nutrients that boost fish life, insects, birds, and wildlife populations. Think about, sometimes after a drought, the ground becomes so hard and so permanent that it needs the flood to kind of reset that area. And I think that's a big deal, because sometimes, I'm sure where you live and out here, there's summers where it's like you feel like you can see 2 feet down in the ground because it's so dry, and just that water that it needs. And then so the water rains, which would be normally rain if the ground was normal, but it floods because the ground is so hard, and just it takes time to build back in and reset that environment. I think that sometimes we have to look at the flood in our lives as a reset. I know that that was a horrible experience, but what now? What's the reset? What is this gonna do in my life? Maybe it's just you're more equipped to handle what the situation is. Maybe you're better prepared. We definitely are getting a beautiful night here. I'd like to talk about after a flood and the waters recedes, it does a lot of cleaning and flushing of the land. It can remove a lot of what doesn't belong. And as you can see, all this stuff here came from somewhere. There's sticks, there's logs, there's trees, and a lot of junk. But this all came from somewhere. It cleaned somewhere and deposited it all here. And that happens a lot in life. What part of the residue left over is what was affected when we experience a storm. We would be foolish to think that those around us aren't affected. And I think this is a good example that somebody else is benefiting from a mess that somebody you don't know has to clean up. And what can you think of any examples in your life of a storm that you experienced, Michael, or that you witnessed or heard about that you've seen leave residue for somebody else to deal with? And listen, it could be even me making bad choices, and just whether it was sin or just poor choices that I affected other people. I remember when I was a kid, I, just got my driver's license and I decided to go almost, I think it was going 50 in a 15 school zone. It was 15 minutes before curfew. I was learning how to drive standard and I was just being a complete idiot and driving. But the residue I left behind that is I almost lost my license. I had to get a lawyer. My mom and dad had to pay out several $100s to get me out of trouble. And I had to behave for for almost 3 years. Otherwise, I would have lost my license. That's a small example, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. I created the storm in that situation, and a lot of other people felt the wrath of it.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I think on a little bit larger scale, I think about things like divorce. When two
Yeah.
parents get divorced, the residue that is left for the children to have to deal with is can be significant, and without proper parenting through that, proper leading through that, that's a residue that can last a lifetime. It's very difficult, especially I think in today's day and age where kids have access to all kinds of media and they have faster access to their friends, if they're not getting the support from their parents that they feel like they should be getting, especially through situations like that, who are they reaching out to? And it's those people that they're reaching out to, or those places that they're reaching out to. You can't control the message. You can't control when the water recedes that they're going to be okay. They're going to benefit from it on the other side. So I think of floods. Floods like that, and the residue that it leaves behind.
Yeah. That's definitely a good example of a flood that's, not good, but it's how you handle it that can make the situation a little better. I think with flood, you look at these towns in the South that are just completely wiped out by a flood, and it seems like almost every year there's one somewhere that something's affected. I know somebody asked me, why, again, why are we doing the flood? And why are we talking about the flood? And it's those moments that are just overwhelming, but there's always light at the end of the tunnel. You've seen all these organizations and people just gather around these towns and people that are in desperate need. And I think our communities that we form are the same way. When we're going through trouble, we have people, or we need people to be in our lives to help us navigate those floods. Because again, I think our circle is impacted by what we're going through. Uh, One of the other things that I wanted to sit on for a minute is, a flood can bring new life. It can bring seeds and like I said, the nutrients, but it can bring seeds, and you could get trees on a shoreline or in a rock wall. You can't see it on the camera, but there's this big rock wall here that has trees all growing out of it. And a lot of that can be deposited just because of the waves. That's something that just happens because of how things were created, how the storm around it. I was thinking about sometimes when life is tough, the floods come in, are we letting it bury us or plant us? What I mean by that is any seed that you plant, the process is that seed is decayed and destroyed so life can come from it. And I think that's a lot of what the flood is like. It brings new life eventually, but what is the in between? I think that is true for a lot of people. You're dealing with floodwater. So with a seed, you don't bury seeds, you plant them. And I think if we look at what was planted during our storm, during the process, how does that affect what's to come? Because I think planting things take time, and there's a process of developing and growing that has to be experienced in the planting. What does that look like? How does that, affect things that you look at in your
Okay.
life?
Yeah, Jeremy, it really continues and drives home that theme that you've talked about previously of the being a victim or being a survivor. Um, when we look at our situations, are we going to rise up, bloom to something more beautiful than we were before? Or are we going to stay buried underneath that mud? And it is so easy for us to sit here and say rise up and bloom, right? But we make it sound so easy, but truthfully it is. And what I mean by that is you're still gonna, if your situation involved loss, you're still gonna feel the loss. You're
Mhm.
still gonna feel every bit of it, but your road to recovery is shortened by making a decision that I'm going to learn from this flood. I'm going to
Yeah.
see myself as planted. I'm going to push this mud that has buried me away, and I'm going to bloom into something more beautiful. In doing that, people will witness who you've become, and you'll inspire others. Jeremy, the type of people
Mm,
that you and
that's
I
good.
you and I are, we've mentioned it in conversations with each other all the time. Who are we if we don't help others, if we're not a light for others? One of my favorite poets of all time, Ralph Waldo Emerson, said that the definition of success was making one man breathe easier. And sometimes
Good. That's good.
that sometimes that easier breath comes from just observing someone else demonstrating how to become a survivor. And so far be it from me to stay down for a long time. Both of us are leaders in our homes. We're both leaders in our careers. And if we allow ourselves to be buried, then that brings everyone down under the soil with you. But if you
Yeah.
take that moment that we talked about to feel the emotions and feel the feelings, and then burst up from the mud, we're going to have those join us, and we're going to have those witness what we were able to do and have strength for themselves to do the same.
Yeah. And I think when you bury something, you know, it could be buried temporarily, but then the mindset you take on it is it's planted. But when you plant something, you need to affect it in a certain way. It needs water, it needs the right nutrients in the soil to start growing. So sometimes, you know something has been buried or been planted for a long time. I mean, they found seeds in Egypt in these vessels that had been there 3,000 years, and they added the right amount of moisture and the right amount of soil, and they grew. I mean, it's amazing how long something can last that you planted, and you might miss the growing season if you're not paying attention,
Well,
and if you're not doing the work.
everything needs time to grow. So to reference your point of saying you can be buried for a moment, you're right, because everything needs time to
Mm-hmm.
grow. So during that
Yeah.
time, that's when you're feeling your emotions, and you're even that emotion of I'm never going to make it, because that's real, right?
Yep.
It's very, very real. I can't think of a situation or a trial or a challenge that I went through that I didn't allow myself for a brief moment to think, I'm not going to make it on the other side of this. Now that I'm older, more experienced, and gone through many challenges, that thought of I'm not going to make it is very fleeting, very, very fleeting. Um, so, and it is, that comes from reflecting back on your overcoming the previous times.
I'm glad you said when we were younger and now that we're older. I also was thinking about this week. We both grow up in similar upbringings, but in completely different households. You know, we both witnessed each other's household a lot growing up, and we both knew each other's parents and all that. But do you ever think what are some things that you nurtured in your life that you've continued on that you've seen your parents, or maybe some things you've buried? And I know that's a tough question because our moms are both gonna probably watch this and they're gonna be like, "What are you guys talking about? You didn't ask us first." So
Yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, that's excellent, right? That's really an excellent question, and one of the things I can say with absolute certainty is that the faith of my
yeah.
parents, that is absolutely something that I've nurtured. And I took my own path to where I am today. So I also
Hmm.
take the the permission from my parents to be able to do that. And when I say permission, I genuinely mean that, because there are some households of some of our friends that they had no choice but to be up every Sunday morning, be in church. You better be standing up when the song service. My parents gave me the freedom to take my own journey. And that was really important. What they correcting directly in behaviors, my parents were attempting to correct through prayer. And I think that's important, because
That's
then
good.
then my faith becomes mine, and the walk that I have is mine. It wasn't laid out before me by my parents or forced upon me by my parents. It was when they allowed me to come up upon myself. Now, some of the things that I certainly left behind is what I don't do is look at my upbringing in the 80s with a lens from 2026, because 2026 is different in a whole lot of ways. But what I do bring with me is, or what I did leave behind, um, is the. You're really asking me to go out there on this
It's
one, Jeremy.
tough.
What I
It's
did leave
tough. I
behind
know.
was 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 really the legalism of the church. I'll be honest.
Yep.
Really,
Fair.
the things that were taught in the church that I had discovered on my walk, that didn't necessarily, it's not that they were opposition to the Bible. It was one man's interpretation of the Bible that was delivered to me in a very legalistic way. And I think I just had this conversation with one of my coworkers today, where I told her I feel like my mission is to show the love of God first and foremost, demonstrate every single day the love of God, share what my interpretation of things mean, and invite you to explore it for yourself. Now, in the background, I'm going to be praying and praying nonstop. There's
Yeah.
not a single one of my employees or friends that I don't start every morning covering them in prayer. But
That's awesome.
it's also going to be their journey, just as I was allowed to have. And and what I mean by that, so people don't misinterpret that. What I mean by that is, for me, my job is to love you like Christ loves you. My job is to continue to share the love of Christ. My job isn't to say, well, don't you dare pick up that cigarette. Don't you dare use that cuss word. My job is just to show you, lead by example, and it's your walk. And I think that's a very stark difference than the way that we grew up in Critter County days, quite honestly. So
So
for those that
I
don't know, that's a reference to our Sunday school program that Jeremy and I attended.
I think one of the things that I continued, and my parents handled it different, but the same theme was exposure. That they exposed me to a lot of things. I didn't have a lot of choice in what I got to do because of whether it was, you know, we showed up to church, but we had to look the part. We always had to wear those stupid khakis, and we always had to wear a stupid sweater, or a button down, and it wasn't even Easter. I mean, that was a whole nother level, but just like the normal Sundays, and we showed up on Sunday mornings early, like Michael said, and church, and we participated because you weren't allowed not to, and you had to go to Sunday nights, and then we had Wednesday nights, and then I'm sure you remember like the one Friday night a month we had to do as well. So we were always in church, and one of the things I do different is I don't force my kids into anything. I expose them. I let them see what God can do. I let them see what He's done in my life. I let them see the change. I tell them about some of the choices that I've made and some of the journeys that I've been a part of because I want them to understand in the end, it's going to be their choice. Like, I feel like sometimes growing up, I wasn't given the choice. So when I got to make the choice, I kind of went as far in the opposite direction as I could because I never really knew what I wanted. I, kind of went wild because I wasn't sure what I wanted. All I knew is that I wanted something different than what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
And because all I saw was a religion. I saw a God to be scared of, a God to fear, and that's good because now I have a healthy fear of God, but I didn't know what that was when I was a kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think that's
I
yeah, go
think it's
ahead.
also important for me to quickly say that I fully recognize that there is a sample size that structure is the best for them. Very structured church, and I said legalistic earlier, is the best for them. I get it. And if that's your style and that's what you like, that I'm definitely not saying on the other end that there's anything wrong with that. What I'm saying is it wasn't right for me. I am absolutely a Jesus over religion person. Personal relationship with Jesus over religion.
I remember the first time I got to preach in church, and it was really a pivotal moment for me. I came down all ready to go, and Stephanie was like, "Are you wearing a hat to preach in?" I go, "Absolutely." And she's like, "You cannot do that." And I said, "God said I can. He said, 'Come as you are. And if I need to change you, I will change you. I will make it clear.'" And, I actually used that in the sermon too, which was pretty funny. I don't know how much she appreciated it, but I definitely went there. But I think that's the point that I try to let my kids see that they have to come to those choices themselves. We show them the way, we be the example. We don't always get it right. We get it wrong a lot of times, but we show them and help them see what it looks like to live out what we're called to be. And I'll tell you one of the things that I've prayed about and I've seen, miracles happen in my kids in a lot of ways, but I just say, God, you give them the encounter that I got in the last 10 years, but you give it to them now because it can't come from me because it won't be real. If I assign them their experience, it won't be it won't be valuable. It won't be memorable. It won't be unforgettable. And it's scary to let that kind of control go because as leaders, we tend to control things. And I think even my leadership style has changed over the years where I let people do what they want. I want them to fail because in theory, that should be things they won't do again. and I want my kids to experience the same way. I want them to make mistakes. If they swear, like, yo, we don't use that kind of language, and that's it. Like, it's not like, go to your room, you just lost your cell phone for a week. Now, we do the cell phone check. I don't know if you do that, but every once in a while we go through their phones, and I tell them, if the password's changed, your phone's going to the bottom of the lake.
And it's very, very hard to the approach that you're talking about. It's really hard because the experience that we went through, we want to
Yeah,
protect our kids from, right? Like, I really like that you said that you pray for them now in a way that the experiences that you have, the personal experience with Jesus Christ that you have, you pray that they do. And
exactly.
I certainly echoed those sentiments exactly. That's exactly my prayers for my daughter. Is the things that it took me 40 plus years to recognize and to get to, show her now. The blessings that you have given to me, stall them, double them, and give them to my kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, uh, we got them Bibles, Action Comic Bible, and it was something that she played with. Micah doesn't always love books. Bible for kids on an app, and it's interactive and it's Bible stories, and he loves it. So it's like, meet them where they're at. You kind of said that, like, our kids aren't 80s kids growing up in 2026. They're 2026 kids, and
Hmm.
we're not. and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so how they look at life is way different. I'm sure you remember when we were kids and we had that big ice storm and we had no power for weeks. It sucked, to be honest, but we figured it out because we were kids of the outdoors. We were kids that figured out how to entertain ourselves without technology. But you lose power for 15 minutes in here and they're like, what do? We don't know what to do.
Hmm.
And so we're working on that.
Hmm.
So that's something that I spent a lot of time on, BMX and dirt bikes and all that growing up my whole life. But if it's for him, that's amazing. If it's not, that's good, because that's might not be his passion or his desire, but you got to plant those things. You got to expose your children to things where it makes sense. But you also want to make sure you have like measures in place to protect what exposure other people give them. And I think that's
100%.
and that's a scary thing,
Hmm.
because you can't control that. But those are things that you can just pray that they use wisdom. They set up those guardrails because they've seen you do it and they've seen you
Hmm.
make wise choices, whether
Hmm.
it's even being very particular that, we don't do R-rated movies. Micah will be looking through the app store and he's like, "Oh man, this is for 10 and up, and I'm only 7." So he just, like, he gets upset about it and he wants us to make an exception, but he knows we can't make an exception. So
Hmm.
he just deals with it. And I think
Hmm.
that's part of it. I know it's getting super dark now and you guys probably can't see me as well as I was hoping, um but it is a pretty amazing view with that sun breaking on the lake there. Well, Michael, do you want to have any closing words, and we'll wrap up this episode, because I know it's a little different, and we but we wanted to get on here and share for a little while and just talk, and expect to see some live stuff. We're figuring out the problems we've been facing with live, so it's coming.
Yeah, I think it's hopefully this week we start getting into some live stuff or where we're really looking for that interaction that we talked about previously.
Yeah.
We're saying our opinions. We're stating what's true to us in hopes
Hmm.
that what is true to you can start a conversation. So we're looking for that interaction when we start going live here, and we'll make sure that we're posting about what channels we're going live on. Always look forward to this time, and always look forward to the next time. So
Absolutely. And just so you guys know, only 97% of podcasts make it to episode 3. And we are planning on episode 4 already. So well done. um, but no, it's serious. Like, this is a lot of people quit right away when things are tough and we have to figure out time. And like Michael said earlier, that he's had a crazy week. I've had a crazy week. We both know that this is part of our assignment. And this is how we want to make sure that we're communicating with the listeners, and we really want to know that feedback. So if you get a chance, I know I don't want to be always going, oh, please subscribe and please like and please comment, but I'm telling you, it makes a huge difference. It
Yeah.
pushes this content out all over the place, and that's what we need. We just want to keep sharing the message with people we would never expect from all over the US, which is really cool. And it's people that are not, that don't know us, and that's
Mhm.
part of the excitement of this, is that, you know, the more people that get exposed to the conversation of the flood, they will understand that, like, this is about life, this is about what we can do, and you know, what we can bring, hopefully bring some light to, and don't let it be buried. We're making sure that things are starting to get the right opportunity to grow. So that being said, please have a great night, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Absolutely.